What if I told you that the most powerful way to make her emotionally addicted to you isn't in what you give her, but in the story she tells herself about you? Long after you're gone, stay with me. Because once you learn how to become the author of her inner world, you'll never be just another man in her past. You'll be the one she rewrites her entire life around. She won't remember what you said. She might not even remember what you wore. But she will always remember how you made her feel. That's the real currency in emotional connection, feeling, not facts. And there's a law, unspoken but devastatingly powerful, that governs it. It's the law of emotional imprinting. In simple terms, the first intense emotional experience she shares with you becomes psychologically fused with who you are in her mind. That emotion, whether it's euphoria, fear, longing, or vulnerability, becomes the anchor. You become the emotional trigger. And once that trigger is wired into her nervous system, it's game over. Every time she feels that emotion again, her mind pulls your name from the shadows. Why does it work? Because the human brain doesn't store experiences the way a computer stores files. We don't access memories as facts. We relive them as sensations. Emotions are like fingerprints on a glass, messy, subtle, and permanent unless deliberately wiped clean. If you're the first one to give her an emotional high or an emotional scar, that intensity creates a neurological tattoo. It doesn't fade. It just sinks deeper. Psychologically, this is tied to the hippocampus and amygdala, the two regions of the brain that manage memory and emotion. When you experience something intense, especially for the first time, your brain releases a cocktail of neurotransmitters: dopamine, oxytocin, adrenaline, and they encode the memory in high definition. Clarity, pair that neurochemical surge with your face, your voice, your presence. Now you become the memory. Let me show you how this plays out in the real world. There's a story that floated around among insiders in Hollywood. A young actress new to L.A. meets a slightly older producer at a networking event. He's not the best-looking guy in the room, but he's different, quietly confident, mysterious. He listens more than he talks, and when he finally speaks, he says something that cuts through her surface like a scalpel. You don't belong here, and that's exactly why you're going to own it. No cheesy line, just impact. That night, they walk through downtown L.A. for hours. He takes her to a rooftop with a view she's never seen before. The city's lit up, the wind's warm, and she opens up about things she never tells anyone: abandonment, fear, imposter syndrome. And he just listens, then leans in and says, "They'll never understand the fire in you, but I do." She falls. Not for his looks, not for his money, but because he became the first man who matched her internal chaos with calm. The first man who didn't try to fix her, he simply felt her. That night was her emotional imprint. And years later, even after fame, therapy, and broken engagements, when she sees a city skyline, she thinks of him. This happens in everyday life too. Remember your first heartbreak, or your first time staying up all night talking to someone who just got you. These moments didn't just pass, you carry them. That's emotional imprinting. It's not something she chooses. It's something that happens to her, and if you understand this law, you can become the kind of man she doesn't just want, but the kind she can't emotionally function without. Now, let's get surgical with it. How do you make it happen? It starts with emotional depth. Small talk is dead talk. Surface-level questions get surface-level connections. You need to engineer a moment of intensity without forcing it. And intensity doesn't always mean drama. It means vulnerability, contrast, and presence. You take her somewhere she's never been before. Not a place of feeling. Ask her something real. Not what do you do, but what moment made you who you are. Not what kind of music do you like, but what song would play during the most painful moment of your life. That's the difference between being another guy in her life and being the guy who makes a mark. You pair that emotional opening with a unique experience. It could be a late night drive with no destination, a walk through a quiet part of the city, or a strange cafe hidden behind a bookstore. Make her feel like she's stepped into another world, a world that only exists when she's with you. That creates context. Context creates memory, and memory fused with emotion creates imprint. The first emotional imprint can also be fear. Don't underestimate the power of shared adrenaline. That's why amusement parks, horror movies, and travel can be magnetic. Studies have shown that couples who go on exciting, fear-inducing dates report stronger attraction and bonding. It's called misattribution of arousal. Her body interprets adrenaline as attraction, and you're the one she's looking at when it hits. There's a story from a clinical psychology journal about a woman who fell for her paramedic. After she had a car accident, this man was the first face she saw while bleeding and terrified. He spoke calmly, cracked a joke, held her hand while they stabilized her neck. He was professional, but present. They met again after her recovery. She confessed she couldn't stop thinking about him. Why? Her brain had paired her emotional trauma with his face, his voice, his energy. That's imprinting at its rawest. You don't need a life or death moment, but you do need a moment that matters, because when something matters, it sticks. There's a dark side too. If you're the first to make her cry in a way no one else has, if you're the first man who turns her softness into insecurity, that too imprints. Some men unknowingly become the emotional abuser a woman never forgets. That's not seduction, it's damage. And it's important to know which side of the line you're playing on. Because once you imprint, you can't erase it. You become part of her emotional DNA. That's power, and power is responsibility. Here's where it gets deeper. She can't imprint twice in the same way. The first time is always the strongest. That's why first loves are unforgettable, even if they were a mess. That's why a woman who had her heart shattered once guards it differently the next time. The chemical cocktail is weaker. The neural pathways are already built. It's harder to get through. So if you're the first man to take her to emotional depths she's never touched, you don't just leave a mark, you leave a blueprint. This is also why women become emotionally dependent on the man who brings them contrast. If her world is controlled, calm, and predictable, she'll crave mystery. If her world is chaos, she'll crave stability. If you give her the emotional contrast that completes her internal polarity, she'll return to you again and again. Let's bring this to something very real. There was a woman I once knew, high-powered executive energy, moved like a storm in a dress. No man intimidated her, most didn't even get close, until she met a man who didn't chase, didn't flatter, and didn't try to dominate. He just understood her. On their first real conversation, he said, "You act like you're in control of everything, but I bet that scares the hell out of you." She froze. Then laughed, then melted. That night they didn't kiss, but they talked until dawn, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to win. That emotional imprint, it broke through armor 10 years of therapy couldn't touch. He was the first to see her without trying to fix her. She became dependent not on his approval, but on the way he felt like home in a world that always felt like war. So how do you use this without being manipulative? Simple, don't fake it, feel it too. Use emotional imprinting not to trap, but to connect. Create unforgettable moments not for control, but for chemistry. Let her feel something no one else ever gave her, and give it in a way that's real. She won't remember your compliments, she won't remember what car you drove, but she will remember that one night when the world stopped and you made her feel like the only person alive. That's not luck, that's not game, that's psychological precision, that's emotional imprinting. There's a silent addiction more powerful than love, more consuming than lust, and more unforgettable than kindness. It's the addiction to uncertainty. The mind craves clarity, but the heart gets hooked on chaos. That's the paradox. The people we remember most are rarely the ones who gave us peace. They're the ones who made us feel everything. And that's where push-pull comes in. Push-pull isn't just a tactic. It's a psychological rhythm, a dance between presence and distance, reward and withdrawal, validation and doubt. It builds emotional tension like a thriller movie you can't stop watching. The unpredictable becomes unforgettable because the brain becomes obsessed with resolving the emotional puzzle you've created. It works because of how the human brain is wired. Our brains are designed to complete patterns. When we get affection consistently, the brain registers it as safe, but predictable. Predictability is comforting, but it's also boring. When you give affection inconsistently, when she thinks she has you one moment, then wonders if she still does the next, her brain starts chasing the reward. And every time she doesn't get it, the craving deepens. It's called intermittent reinforcement, and it's the same mechanism that makes slot machines addictive. A rat in a cage that gets a sugar pellet, every time it presses a button will press it occasionally. A rat that gets a pellet only sometimes at random becomes obsessed. It won't stop pressing. It starts chasing the next reward, even if it never comes. You don't want to be the sugar pellet. You want to be the slot machine. Here's how that works in a relationship. The more predictable your emotional responses are, the more she feels in control. And when someone feels fully in control of you, their emotional investment drops. But when you become slightly unpredictable, not erratic, but mysterious, you become emotionally expensive. The brain assigns value to what it can't easily understand, and what has value is kept. There's a story I once heard from a behavioral therapist in London. She had a client early 30s, sharp, confident, emotionally intelligent. This woman had been in a 4-year relationship with a man who treated her like a queen. Flowers on Tuesdays, good morning texts like clockwork, date nights scheduled and romantic. And yet, when they broke up, she felt nothing. She told her therapist, "I loved him, but I never chased him. It was all just there, predictable, easy." Contrast that with her next relationship. The guy was attentive 1 week, then emotionally unavailable the next. They'd have nights of intense connection, deep conversations, incredible chemistry, and then days where he pulled away without warning. She found herself replaying voice notes, wondering what went wrong, wanting to earn back the closeness. The therapist asked her, "Which one do you still think about?" She laughed, "The one who made me question myself." This is not about being cruel. It's about being dynamic. Push-pull is emotional contrast, and emotional contrast is what creates emotional intensity. You become the storm and the shelter, the silence and the soundtrack. You don't live in a single emotional state. You become the range she experiences. The psychology behind it is rooted in attachment theory and dopaminergic response. When your behavior creates emotional tension, her brain starts producing dopamine, not from your presence, but from the anticipation of your next move. Dopamine is not the chemical of pleasure. It's the chemical of pursuit, and pursuit is what turns interest into obsession. There's another case from a research study in evolutionary psychology. Women were shown profiles of men, some who expressed consistent interest, others who were ambiguous or hot and cold. The women were more attracted to the ambiguous ones. Why? Because the uncertainty activated parts of the brain associated with obsession and curiosity. They found themselves thinking about those men longer, even when the men were objectively less compatible. That's what push-pull does. It doesn't just make her want you. It makes her ruminate about you, replaying moments, dissecting messages, reading between lines that you never even wrote. A woman once told me about the guy she couldn't stop loving, even after he ghosted her. "He made me feel like I was the only one in the room," she said. "And then he'd disappear for days. I thought about him more when he was gone than when he was around. I couldn't predict him, and that made me want him more." This man wasn't even particularly charismatic, but he mastered the push-pull dynamic. He gave her intimacy, then vanished. Gave her warmth, then coldness. Complimented her deeply, then teased her lightly. She never knew which version she was going to get, and that mystery became emotional glue. One night, he told her she was unlike anyone he'd ever met. The next day, he didn't reply for 36 hours. By the time he responded with, "Sorry, was in my zone," she wasn't mad, she was relieved. That relief came with dopamine. That dopamine deepened her bond. She didn't realize she was being conditioned like a lab animal, but she was. And the leash was emotional. That's the real seduction, not giving her everything she wants. It's giving her just enough to make her reach. And every time she reaches, her emotional investment rises. You create a space where she's always slightly off, balance, always seeking, always recalibrating around you. You become the center of gravity, not by dominating her, but by activating the emotional dance that never quite lets her settle. Here's where most men mess it up. They push too hard and forget to pull, or they pull too far and forget to push back in. Push-pull isn't about ghosting. It's not about being emotionally abusive or manipulative. It's about creating tension and then releasing it, like a well-written novel. If all you do is pull away, you become distant. If all you do is push, you become predictable. The magic is in the oscillation, the rhythm of give and take. It can be as subtle as shifting your tone mid-conversation. 1 minute, you're engaged and flirting. The next, you lean back, glance away, take a moment. You're present but not fully available. She feels you but can't fully hold you. That's the art. Think of James Bond. Think of Don Draper. Think of the characters women obsess over. They're not overly expressive. They don't pour out their emotions like wine at a cheap party. They're controlled. Selective. You never quite know if they're falling in love with you or studying you like a chess move. That ambiguity is erotic. Even in text conversations, the push-pull principle thrives. You don't reply instantly every time. You let a message sit. You send something warm and then something teasing. You pull her in with emotional connection, then push slightly with playful distance. Not cold, not cruel, just enough contrast to make her crave resolution. In one case I read on a relationship psychology forum, a woman explained how her boyfriend used to say things like, "You're incredible, but sometimes I wonder if we met at the wrong time." That one line created a loop in her mind. He loved her, but maybe not enough. He was there, but maybe not forever. That uncertainty kept her working for the relationship long after he stopped trying. It wasn't healthy, but it was effective. The danger of push-pull is also its power. It creates emotional dependency through instability. It forms a trauma bond if taken too far. So if you use it with emotional awareness, because the same fire that forges obsession can also burn trust. The goal isn't to hurt her, it's to awaken a side of her that only you seem to activate. When you master push-pull, you stop being just another guy she dated. You become a mental echo, a pattern her mind keeps returning to, a puzzle her heart is still trying to solve. Not because you were perfect, but because you were unpredictable. And that's what we chase, not certainty. But the high of never knowing what comes next. She doesn't fall for the man who keeps her safe. She falls for the man who makes her feel unsafe, and then saves her. That's not contradiction, that's chemistry. Because once you become the architect of her emotional highs and lows, you become the center of her nervous system. And once her emotions are tied to you, her logic doesn't stand a chance. Most men try to win her over by being reliable. Predictable, sweet, kind, safe, that works for friendship. But what hooks a woman to the point where she thinks about you even when she doesn't want to is emotional anchoring. You don't just make her feel something. You become the reason she feels it. You become the calm and the storm, the cure and the cause. It works because of a quirk in how emotional memory operates. The human brain, especially the female brain, wired with a stronger connection between the amygdala and hippocampus, doesn't just remember events. It remembers who was there when the emotion peaked. That's the key. Whoever is present at the emotional peak gets burned into the memory. And when you are both the source of emotional tension and the one who resolves it, she begins to psychologically associate her entire emotional spectrum with you. There's a story I once heard about a woman who dated 2 men in the same year. One was stable, always present, emotionally available, gentle. The other was volatile, intense, disappeared sometimes, pulled her into arguments only to pull her even closer after. Guess which one she couldn't stop thinking about? Not the one who loved her cleanly, the one who hurt her, then held her. Because he made her feel more, he created tension, and then became the release. That's anchoring. And once you control the release of tension in her emotional world, you control the narrative she tells herself about love. Let's be clear, this isn't about abuse. This isn't about manipulation or playing God with her heart. It's about understanding a deep truth about attraction. It's not born in calm waters. It's born in conflict, resolution, and emotional charge. Love isn't found in neutrality. It's forged in fire. You must be the spark that lights her, and the rain that cools her. There's a powerful psychological experiment that proves this. It's called the Capilano Suspension Bridge Study. In it, male participants were approached by an attractive female researcher, either on a safe, low bridge, or a high, shaky, terrifying suspension bridge. The ones on the high bridge whose bodies were experiencing adrenaline and emotional arousal were far more likely to call her afterward. Why? Because their brains misattributed the emotional spike of fear to attraction. She became the emotional anchor to their physiological high. You become that bridge, the shaky, exhilarating, unstable environment that triggers her senses. When she's with you, she should never be sure if the next moment will make her laugh, melt, scream, or lean in. That not knowing becomes an addiction. One man I once studied did this masterfully. He was a musician, brooding, introspective, magnetic in a quiet kind of way. He'd bring women into his world with intensity, candle-lit studios, whispered secrets late, night walks where he'd open up just enough to create a connection, then suddenly go cold. They'd text him something vulnerable, and he'd go silent for hours only to show up the next day with a song he wrote for them. That contradiction, distance and intimacy, chaos and comfort, anchored their emotions to him. They weren't sure if he was safe. But he felt unforgettable. That's the trade. There's another story from a relationship counselor who worked with high-powered couples. A client of hers, a woman, successful, beautiful, composed, said she didn't know why she couldn't let go of her ex. He made me cry more than anyone else, she said, but he also made me feel like I was the only woman who existed when we were good. That's the pattern. Emotional swings paired with moments of safety create dependency. She doesn't chase the man. She chases the resolution. And when you are the only one who provides it, she needs you like oxygen. The brain produces oxytocin during moments of emotional bonding. But it also produces cortisol during stress and dopamine during anticipation. When you are responsible for all three, she starts to experience love and pain through the same lens, you. She smiles because of you. She cries because of you. She hopes, doubts, burns, and heals, all in your presence. That's when it's no longer a relationship. It's emotional captivity. You create this by embracing polarity. You're not just affectionate. You're teasing. You're not just vulnerable. You're unavailable at times. You hold her when she's insecure, but you also challenge her when she tries to control you. She never quite gets all of you, but she gets enough to keep climbing. It's the illusion of near completion that creates obsession. If she ever fully gets you, the hunt dies. But if she almost gets you again and again, you become a mystery, not a memory. Even in communication, anchoring plays out. She's upset, you listen, you let her unravel, then you offer silence, not advice, just space. And just when she starts to spiral, you say the one thing that disarms her. You're safe with me, even when you're a mess. In that moment, you've tied her breakdown to your embrace. She won't forget it. She'll crave it, because you didn't just comfort her. You anchored that comfort to your presence. That's how you become irreplaceable. I knew a woman once artistic, a little broken, intensely loyal. She dated a man who challenged her constantly. He'd say things like, "You sabotage every good thing in your life, and I'm the first man who's not going to let you run." She hated him for it. But she also loved him more than anyone. He didn't just soothe her chaos, he saw it, and instead of retreating, he moved in closer. That kind of emotional bravery, that becomes a lifeline. Even after they ended, she said, "No one ever held space for my darkness the way he did." When you show up for her shadow and her light, you become the only place she feels complete. That's emotional anchoring. You turn her emotional state into a maze, and you become both the trap and the key. And when she learns that no one else gives her the intensity and the relief, she stops looking elsewhere. But be careful. Power without restraint becomes cruelty. The goal is not to break her, it's to awaken her. You don't create chaos just to manipulate. You create contrast to make her feel alive, because what women fear more than pain is numbness. And you never want her to feel numb around you. Predictability makes her numb. Neutrality makes her drift. But when she feels everything in your presence, from pleasure to fear to laughter to tears, you become the emotional epicenter of her world. This is the essence of emotional anchoring, not just being the man she wants, but being the emotional landscape she lives in. You create storms so she can experience the calm. You pull away so your touch feels like salvation when it returns. You challenge her so your approval means something. You confuse her so she learns to crave your clarity. And the moment she realizes that no emotion feels complete without you in it is the moment you win. She doesn't want a perfect love. She wants an unforgettable one. Give her the roller coaster and be the only one who knows how to stop the ride. There's a moment in every connection where the emotions crest. The conversation is electric. Her pupils dilate. Her body leans in. She opens up, vulnerable, laughing at things that aren't that funny, holding on to every word like it's oxygen. That moment is sacred. And that's exactly when you disappear. Not forever, just long enough. Because value is never created by presence. It's created by absence. A man who is always available becomes background noise. A man who knows when to leave becomes unforgettable. The psychology behind this is brutal and ancient. Scarcity triggers desire. The less of something there is, the more value the human mind assigns to it. You can have two diamonds identical in size and cut, but if one is rare and the other is mass-produced, the rare one becomes priceless. Not because of what it is, but because of what it costs to have. Humans work the same way. We value what we don't have. We obsess over what we can't touch. We crave what might disappear. So when you pull away at the emotional peak, her brain enters scarcity mode. And that's when the emotional addiction begins. A woman doesn't fall for the man who texts her every morning. She falls for the man who made her feel everything on Friday night and didn't say a word on Saturday. Not because he's playing games, but because he's creating emotional gravity. His silence becomes the space where her mind starts to orbit. There's a real-world example of this in behavioral economics. The scarcity principle was studied by psychologist Stephen Wurtzel. Participants were given identical cookies, same size, same brand, same taste, but half were placed in a full jar. The others in a jar with only two left. The ones from the scarce jar were rated as more desirable, more flavorful, more valuable. The brain projected importance based on availability. We're wired to chase what's disappearing. That's why pulling away at the peak works. You're showing her something emotionally rich, deep connection, sexual chemistry, attention, affection, and then, just as her system is flooded with dopamine and oxytocin, you vanish. You leave her with emotional whiplash, and the brain hates unfinished patterns. So, what does it do? It replays, it loops, it rewinds the conversation, overanalyzes the last look, the last touch, the last text. She doesn't just miss you. She becomes haunted by you because she didn't get closure. She didn't get the descent after the high. You took her up and left her hanging. Now she's not thinking about what she felt. She's thinking about who made her feel it. That's how you turn a moment into a mental imprint. There's a woman I met once, sharp and emotionally complex, who told me a story about a man she met in Paris. They spent 3 nights together. Intimate, poetic, intense. They walked through the streets talking about fears and philosophy. He made her cry with laughter, then held her while she cried about something she hadn't told anyone in years. And on the 4th day he left, no drama, no goodbye, just a note that said, "Some things aren't meant to end, so I won't let this one." She told me she still thinks about him. 10 years later, not because of what they had, but because he disappeared at the peak, she never saw the fade out. She never got the awkward ending or the text that said, "I'm not ready." He became frozen in intensity. And her brain never moved on. This isn't about abandoning women. This is about understanding emotional memory. The brain doesn't record duration, it records intensity. You can spend months with someone and leave no trace. Or you can spend 3 days and become a ghost that lives in their bloodstream. And when you understand scarcity, you begin to use it like a sculptor. You show her beauty, then take it away, you let her taste you. Then you vanish just long enough to make her ache for it again. You become a drug, not because you're constantly available, but because you're not. She starts checking her phone for no reason. Starts talking about you more than she wants to. Starts replaying your name in conversations like it's a song stuck in her head. There's a famous case from 2006 where an Australian behavioral study found that women were more attracted to men whose feelings toward them were uncertain. They were told one of 3 things: the man liked them, didn't like them, or his feelings were unknown. Shockingly, the women were most attracted to the uncertain man. Why? Because the brain craves resolution. And when it can't find it, it creates mental obsession. Scarcity, uncertainty, and ambiguity are not flaws in attraction. They're fuels. Here's where most men blow it. They wait until the connection fades to pull away. Wrong move. You pull away at the peak, when her pupils are dilated, when her walls are down, when she's texting you first. That's when you vanish, not as punishment, but as psychological impact. Because anything that's always around gets devalued. Even diamonds lose meaning if you hand them out like candy. I knew a guy once, wealthy, successful, rest. Every woman liked him, but no woman chased him. You know why? He was always available, always replied. Always offered to make plans. He thought he was being respectful. In reality, he was being replaceable. No woman needs to chase something that's already hers. Now compare him to another man I met. A quiet, emotionally layered bartender. Women were obsessed with him. Why? He had timing. He knew when to look into your eyes like he saw the whole war inside you, and then walk away like he'd never see you again. They'd come back to the bar, hoping he'd remember their name, hoping he'd give them another hour of that silent intensity. And when he did, it felt like gold. He wasn't more attractive, he was more scarce. Scarcity makes every interaction feel earned. And what we earn, we protect. What we chase, we value. What we almost have, but don't quite hold, becomes the most intoxicating thing in the world. Even in conversation, this works. You don't flood her with endless texts. You don't explain yourself at every turn. You don't show your whole hand. You let her lean in. You let her wonder. You build a rhythm where she starts doing the chasing. And the moment she does, the game has already changed. Now you're not just a man. You're an emotional investment. And people don't let go of what they've worked for. It's the same reason luxury brands never go on sale. It's the same reason rare artwork gets auctioned for millions. It's not just about quality, it's about availability. When something is hard to get, the brain assumes it must be valuable. And once she decides you're valuable, pulling away only deepens that belief. But it must be earned. You can't pull away at the start. You have to build the tension first. You have to create the spark, deepen the moment, give her a taste of the real you. Then walk out like it didn't cost you anything. That's what leaves her breathless. That's what rewires her need to include you in her next emotional fix. Because now your absence isn't empty. It's loud, it echoes. And the next time you return, even with just a glance, a message, a touch, it's not casual anymore. It's scarce, it's rare, and that makes it worth everything. Never give a woman all of you at once. Give her the illusion that she's close, then pull back. Let her reach, let her crave, let her build the bridge next time, because the one who reaches feels the need. The one who stays still is the one being pursued. And that, right there, is how scarcity becomes seduction. Not by what you give, but by what you take away. She doesn't fall for who you are. She falls for who she becomes when she's with you. She doesn't chase perfection. She chases reflection. A man who doesn't just see her, but shows her who she really is, with terrifying accuracy. A mirror, not a mask, and that's the move. You don't impress her. You reflect her. Most men try to win her by showcasing themselves. Their job, their goals, their status, their interests. But they miss the truth. The fastest way into a woman's soul is not through self-expression, but empathic reflection. The ability to mirror back the deepest, rawest parts of her inner world. her hopes, her fears, her wounds, her dreams, and do it so cleanly, so quietly, so unshakably that she feels found. Once she feels seen, the dependency begins, because being seen is rare. Being understood is sacred. Most of the world responds to what she shows, but you respond to what she hides, and once she realizes that you speak the language of her interior, she stops comparing you to other men. Because most men speak to her face, you speak to her soul. There's a psychological concept called limbic resonance. It's when two nervous systems begin to sync emotionally, mirroring each other's internal state. Babies do it with mothers. Lovers do it in silence, and masters of seduction use it intentionally. You don't change who you are. You adjust your frequency to match hers. Her energy becomes the blueprint. You become the echo. That's how emotional dependency is built. Not through dominance, but deep familiarity. I once knew a woman, a therapist, ironically, who fell hard for a man who never spoke much. But when he did, he'd say things like, "You've been protecting everyone for so long, you forgot what it feels like to collapse." That sentence, she told me, undid years of armor. Not because it was poetic, but because it was true. He didn't guess, he mirrored. He studied the cracks in her voice, the way her eyes paused on certain words, the sadness she wore like perfume. And when he finally spoke, she felt seen. That's when her logic died. The human brain craves familiarity. It's called the mere exposure effect. We trust what feels known. So when you reflect her inner world, she starts to associate you with her own identity. You're not just a person anymore, you're a projection surface, a man-shaped mirror showing her who she wants to be, who she fears she is, and what she hopes to hide. That fusion of self and other, that's where emotional addiction lives. You say what she was too scared to admit. You call out the things she thought no one noticed. When she's sarcastic, you ask why she's so scared of being soft. When she's defensive, you tell her it's okay to be angry, because someone broke her trust a long time ago. You don't do it aggressively, you do it gently, like a scalpel. The more you name what she can't name herself, the more her psyche reaches for you in moments of emotional dissonance. Because you don't just reflect her back, you organize her internal chaos. There's a term in psychology, congruence. It's the feeling people get when someone reflects both their words and their emotional reality. Most people only reflect what they hear. But a mirror reflects what's felt. You don't respond to her statements, you respond to her subtext. She says she's fine, you hear "I feel unseen." She jokes about being too intense, you say, or maybe the world's just not used to someone who feels this much. That's what she clings to. Because you're not flattering her, you're translating her. In the 1970s, psychologist Carl Rogers developed a therapy style that involved active listening, repeating back someone's thoughts, not just to validate them, but to make them feel fully understood. It worked. Clients bonded deeply with therapists who mirrored their emotional language. In relationships, the same principle creates emotional dependency. When you consistently reflect her emotional state, her pain, her passion, her fears, she starts looking to you to understand herself. You become the lens through which she sees her own story. There was a woman I once met who told me about a man she couldn't forget. He wasn't flashy, but the first night they talked, he said, "You pretend to be complicated to keep people from realizing how simple your need is, just to be loved without conditions." She said it felt like someone cracked her chest open, not because it was romantic, but because it was accurate. He mirrored her core fear, that if she stopped performing, she'd be abandoned. That mirror made her feel exposed and safe. And that combination is addictive. This is why mirroring isn't just about empathy. It's about intimacy without permission. When you become the one who sees her without her having to explain, you bypass her defenses. Most people only know her mask. You see the architecture underneath, and when you speak to that structure, the wounded girl behind the strong woman, the hopeful heart behind the sarcasm, she doesn't just let you in. She builds her identity around you because now, being near you doesn't just feel good. It feels like home. You reflect both her wants and her fears. If she's independent, you mirror that but also tease the fear of losing control. If she wants to be adored, you offer affection, but also the threat of emotional abandonment. You give her the dream, and the possibility of losing it. That duality keeps her locked in. Hope and fear, seen and exposed, desired and disarmed, all at once. She's not just attracted, she's invested. You do this in small moments, in how you respond when she says she's tired, not with "go sleep," but with "you only say that when you're emotionally full, not physically drained." In how you look at her when she's laughing, not with admiration, but curiosity, like you're watching someone try to laugh off the storm inside. You treat her emotions like sacred signals, not inconveniences, and she starts to crave that level of awareness. Because when a woman realizes that someone sees the unspoken pages of her story, she'll never read another book the same way again. Even body language becomes a tool. You mirror her posture, her speech rhythm, her intensity. She talks softly, you drop your voice. She gets animated, you match her energy. Her subconscious reads this as connection. You're not changing who you are. You're showing her that she doesn't need to change either. That creates rapport deeper than words. But here's the twist: mirroring doesn't just build trust. It creates emotional dependence. She starts to believe that only you can understand her at this level. That you have the emotional decoder ring to her soul. And when life gets loud, when feelings become too much, when no one else seems to get it, she comes back to you. Because you are the one who reflects her clearly. You become her clarity. I knew another man, a writer, who fell in love with women through letters. He never chased, he never impressed. He just wrote things like, "You laugh at the wrong moments because you're scared of stillness. You flirt like it's a shield, and I still want to know the version of you that's quiet." These women wrote back pages, not because of his charm, but because he articulated the ghosts inside them. He named their defense mechanisms, not to criticize, but to hold. And once you do that, they don't want to be seen by anyone else. Because they believe no one else will see them the same way again. That's how emotional anchoring happens. You don't just enter her world, you become her internal narrator. She starts thinking in your voice. When she's sad, she hears what you would say. When she's insecure, she wonders how you'd read that insecurity. Your presence isn't even required anymore. You've been downloaded into her system. This is the difference between attraction and imprinting. Attraction fades, imprinting leaves marks, and you do it not by being better, funnier, richer, hotter, but by being closer to her emotional truth than anyone else has ever dared to be. She doesn't want a perfect man, she wants the one who saw her and didn't look away. She wants the man who mirrored her chaos and made it feel like music. She wants the reflection that tells her, "Yes, I know all of you, and I still want you. Be that mirror." And she'll never look for another reflection again. Attraction may begin with chemistry, but intimacy, the kind that leaves fingerprints on the soul, starts with vulnerability. And not just a single reveal, not a one-time sob story or the occasional confession. No. True emotional bonding happens in what psychologists call a loop, a backbond. Fourth rhythm where two people drop their defenses one after the other, slowly and strategically, until it no longer feels like two people, but one shared emotional frequency. That loop, deliberately initiated and fed, is your most powerful weapon. You don't just ask for her story, you create the space where telling it feels like a need, and the way you do that is deceptively simple. You go first. Not with performance, not with flex, but with something raw. You start with a story that reveals a crack. Not a brag disguised as a confession. Not a curated vulnerability meant to manipulate, but a truth. A real one, a memory that shaped you, a fear that still lingers, a pain that never got wrapped in a pretty bow. When she hears it, her instincts will brace for manipulation, but if you do it right, her walls don't go up. They fall inward because it doesn't feel like game, it feels like permission. That's how vulnerability works. It's contagious, but only when it's authentic. We are wired to mirror the emotional tone of the people we trust. It's called affective synchrony, and when one person opens a vein, the other's nervous system is prompted to match it. So when you share something stripped down, unpolished, uncoded, real, you create a pressure, a silence, a pull. Suddenly, she wants to meet you in that space. She wants to feel what you just made her feel. This is called emotional reciprocity, and it's backed by some of the most profound psychological studies on bonding. In 1997, Arthur Aaron published a paper titled The Experimental Generation of Interpersonal Closeness. He created 36 questions designed to escalate intimacy between strangers, but the power wasn't in the questions themselves. It was in the vulnerability loop they produced. You answer, she responds, she answers, you reflect. Each loop digs deeper until strangers felt closer than lifelong friends. That's not theory. That's emotional neurochemistry in motion. And you don't need 36 questions. You need just one spark, a confession, a scar, a moment from your past that says, I don't care how I look right now. I just want you to see the real me. Maybe it's the time your father's silence made you question your worth. Maybe it's the woman who cheated on you, not because she didn't love you, but because she couldn't love herself. Maybe it's that night you stood in a parking lot, wondering if all this success meant anything because you still felt empty. Whatever it is, it needs to bleed a little, not to impress her, but to strip you down in front of her. Then you pause, you don't ask for her story, you wait for it to come. If she resists, you don't push. You model, you stay emotionally exposed, unguarded, grounded, still, and eventually her nervous system will move. She'll blink slower, she'll fidget, she'll lower her voice, and then she'll say something like, "It's weird you said that. I've never told anyone this before." That's the loop opening. Now you lean in, you validate it, not with cliches or pity, but with presence. You say, "That makes so much sense now," or "I see why you protect that part of yourself." Or even just a quiet "thank you for trusting me with that." You've just created the foundation of an emotional circuit. And once someone shares something vulnerable and receives warmth instead of rejection, the brain begins to wire that interaction as safe. Not safe as in boring, safe as in magnetic, safe as in addictive, because we are all carrying stories that never got heard. And the person who listens without judgment becomes a drug. You just became that drug, but here's the twist. This isn't a one-time move. This is a rhythm you create repeatedly. Vulnerability isn't an event, it's a loop, a cycle that goes deeper every time it spins. The more you give, the more she gives. And the more she gives, the more invested she becomes. Emotionally, biochemically, subconsciously. Think of every relationship you've ever had that felt irreplaceable. What made it so? It wasn't shared hobbies or constant sex. It was emotional exposure. The way you two became mirrors of each other's wounds. The way you said, "I'm scared of being abandoned," and she said, "Me too." That's what binds people. There's a true story about two soldiers who became inseparable after a 6-hour conversation during deployment. They didn't start off friends. They were just stuck on a mission together, walking in silence. One of them mentioned how he hadn't spoken to his brother in 5 years. That led to a story about their childhood, and suddenly it was like a dam broke. Both men ended up sharing secrets they hadn't told their partners. That day, they became brothers not because of war, but because of emotional intimacy. That's the power of a vulnerability loop. It shortens emotional timelines, it fast-forwards connection, and yes, it works with women not because you're trying to trick her, but because you're giving her what every woman actually craves: emotional contrast. A man who's solid on the outside but open underneath. A man who can hold her weight but isn't too proud to show his own. That paradox is irresistible, not because it's soft, but because it's rare. Now, here's the next step most guys miss. You reward her openness, not just with words, with energy. The moment she shares, you make her feel like it brought you closer. You say, "Now I get why you light up when you talk about that." Or, "That makes you even more beautiful to me." Or you just touch her gently, like her truth deserves to be held, and now she's hooked. Not on attention, but on connection. Because most of her life, she's had to perform to be loved. Now, she's being understood to be loved. That difference rewires her emotional memory. It rewires who she trusts, and who she turns to the next time she feels scared, confused, unseen. She turns to you, even her body responds. Vulnerability loops trigger oxytocin, in the bonding hormone. That chemical release makes her associate safety and intimacy with your presence, which means she stops craving the rush of a new text and starts craving your emotional availability. But never let it become predictable. Don't overuse your wounds. You're not a trauma vending machine. You're a man, you hold your center, but you let her peek behind the curtain just enough to stay curious. You might say, "There's something I haven't told you yet. It's not something I share easily," and then stop. Watch her lean in. That pause is magnetic, and when you deliver the truth, it needs to feel like a gift, not a weapon. A woman once told me about a man who confessed his darkest moment, how he once stood in front of a mirror and didn't recognize himself anymore. He didn't cry, he didn't dramatize, he just said it like someone who survived something. And then he asked her, "What's the hardest moment you've never talked about?" She told me she fell in love before she answered, because that question came wrapped in safety. That's what you become when you master vulnerability loops. The safest, dangerous man she'll ever meet. Dangerous because you know her, safe because you accept her. And in a world of emotional tourism, you are the first person who actually moves in. That's how you create emotional gravity. You don't just get her attention, you earn her revelation. One loop at a time until she can't tell the story of who she is without mentioning your name. She's not looking for a nice guy. She's not looking for a bad guy either. What she's truly chasing, often without even knowing it, is the full spectrum. The man who can split her world open with softness and shake her foundations with intensity. The man who makes her feel safe and in the same breath makes her heart race. She's chasing contrast, and that's where you come in, because real attraction, lasting, soul-leching attraction isn't built on stability alone. It's built on unpredictability wrapped in emotional authenticity, on polarity, on duality. A man who's always kind, predictable, a man who's always dominant, exhausting, but a man who is gentle and firm, playful and powerful, nurturing and unapologetic. That man is unforgettable. That man is addictive. It's not about being fake. It's about being full. A complete spectrum of masculine energy, unfiltered but controlled, because when she feels everything in your presence, her mind can't look away. Her emotions become invested. Her logic gets bypassed. There's a reason women fall harder for men who are layered. It's psychological, not just romantic. Neuroscience confirms that the brain retains stronger memories when multiple emotions are triggered. This is called the emotional salience network. If you make her feel just one thing, say, comfort, she'll associate you with warmth. But if you make her feel safe, excited, playful, jealous, calm, nervous, aroused, challenged, all in one night, she won't just remember you, she'll orbit you. You become her dopamine roller coaster. Think about it. Most of her life is emotionally flatlined. Polite conversations, predictable men, boring dates, controlled interactions. Then you show up. You're gentle when she's vulnerable, then sharp when she tries to test your edges. You hold her face like she's fragile glass and kiss her like she's the last oxygen on earth. That contrast hits her like a song she didn't know she needed. And once it starts playing, she can't stop rewinding. A woman once told me about a man she couldn't forget. He was the only guy who, after making her cry during a fight, silently walked over, wrapped her in his hoodie, and said, "I hate that I caused this, but I won't walk away just because it got real." She said in that moment, she felt torn. Part of her wanted to scream, part of her wanted to melt. That's the power of contrast. Pain, then comfort, fire, then water, storm, then sanctuary, because it's the shift that causes the emotional bond, not the baseline. And the shift is what you control. You walk into the room with playful mischief in your eyes. You tease her, challenge her, disrupt her patterns. She laughs, she rolls her eyes. Then suddenly, mid-conversation, you drop your voice and say, "You're distracting me." That moment of silence. That shift in tone, that's where attraction lives. not in words, in energy, in showing her without explanation that you contain both chaos and calm, and she'll never quite know which one is about to surface. This unpredictability isn't manipulation, it's aliveness. It's what her nervous system craves, a man who keeps her guessing, not about his loyalty, but about what she'll feel next. Because monotony kills desire, but duality fuels it. Remember, the feminine is chaos, flow, emotion. The masculine is stillness, structure, presence. But when the masculine reflects back dynamic contrast, when you can be the mountain and the lightning, her entire nervous system lights up. She doesn't just see you. She feels herself more in your presence. And that's the magic. You awaken her through your contrast. Think of James Bond not for his gadgets or charm, but for his inner range. One moment, he's killing a man in cold blood. The next, he's adjusting his cufflink, smiling gently at the woman across the table. That emotional dissonance, the calm within chaos, is intoxicating. It signals mastery. That's what women pick up on, not just what you say, but how many layers you can hold without falling apart. There's a study from Rutgers University that found women are more emotionally responsive to variability in emotional expression than to consistent positivity. This means she bonds with a man more when he moves her emotionally in different directions than when he's just sweet all the time. Because she doesn't fall for comfort, she falls for complexity. A friend of mine once dated a woman who, on their second date, challenged him mid-conversation. "You act like nothing rattles you. Don't you ever get angry?" Most men would deflect or explain. He leaned in and said, "You want to see what my anger looks like. Don't confuse control for absence." She told me later, that moment wrecked her. Not because he got angry, but because he showed her a new dimension: power, restrained, fire, managed. That contrast flipped the switch. She went from curious to obsessed. But here's where most men fail. They get stuck in a single mode. They think being strong means emotionless, or being romantic means soft all the time, and they lose her interest slowly and silently because they don't evolve within the interaction. They don't shift states. You want to hold her, be gentle. You want to imprint her, be opposite energies back to back. Wake her up in the morning by pulling her close and whispering how much she means to you. Then tease her at breakfast like you don't care if she walks out the door. Send her a love note in the afternoon, but later make her chase your attention just a little. Then kiss her like you've been starving. Keep her emotions in motion. That's how you stay under her skin. And no, this doesn't mean playing mind games. It means being a complete man, the lover and the warrior, the listener and the challenger, the boy who still feels and the man who never flinches. She wants to meet all of you, and the more of you that shows up, the more addicted she becomes. There's a psychological concept called transference. It's when a person projects old emotional patterns onto someone new, usually a parent dynamic, or an unresolved attachment figure. When you show her contrast, you awaken all those dormant archetypes. She starts feeling like she's known you before. Not just in this life, but in every emotional script she's ever played. That's when she becomes emotionally dependent. Not because you filled a role, but because you represented all of them at once. One man once told me that his secret wasn't looks or money. It was the way he shifted energy. I could make her feel like the only girl in the world, and then make her doubt if I'd kiss her again. But not because I was cold, because I was dynamic. He didn't make her insecure. He made her feel, and that's what contrast does. It turns emotional numbness into intensity. If she cries with you, and then laughs with you, and then gets frustrated with you, and then wants you again all in one night, you've just created an imprint. You've made her feel so alive in your presence that silence feels like withdrawal, and she'll crave that feeling over logic every single time. It's not about control. It's about range. It's not about playing God. It's about showing her the universe inside you. Be the warmth that heals her, and the shadow that challenges her. Be the arms she runs to, and the mirror that exposes her. Be the hero who saves her, and the storm that shatters her comfort zone, not because you need to dominate, but because contrast is how the soul recognizes its match. Attraction gets her attention. Seduction makes her lean in. But dependence, that happens quietly, almost invisibly, not with grand gestures or fireworks, but with repetition through patterns. Through the slow, deliberate stitching of your presence into the fabric of her day until it's not just welcome, it's expected. Until you're not someone she sees, you're someone she experiences on autopilot. It starts small, a voice note in the morning, a text she sees just before sleep, a meme you send when she's stressed that makes her laugh harder than she did all day. It feels playful, casual, innocent, but what you're doing is deeper than attention. You're installing presence. Quietly, she begins to associate her emotional moments with you. That's the goal. Not to interrupt her day, but to blend into it so seamlessly that her nervous system starts to scan for you, even in your absence. Psychologically, this is known as environmental embedding. It's what advertisers exploit when they use repetition to make you prefer one brand over another, not because it's better, but because it's familiar. The brain doesn't just like patterns, it trusts them, and when a person becomes part of your daily loop, they begin to feel essential. Not by force, but by default. That's how you become addictive. There's a story about a woman named Erica who never thought she'd fall for a man she wasn't physically obsessed with. He wasn't her type, but he messaged her every morning, nothing heavy, just hope today feels less heavy than yesterday. He asked about her projects. He remembered her coworker's name. One time, she posted an Instagram story of a cloudy sky, and he sent her a Spotify link to a calming playlist with the caption, "For skies like that." At first, she thought it was sweet. Then she started playing that playlist every time it rained, and eventually, she wasn't playing the music for the weather. She was playing it to feel him. That's how deep it got. He embedded himself in her routine with nuance, with intention, with patience, and that's how you do it, not all at once, not by asking her to depend on you, but by creating emotional anchors in her life, triggers that silently whisper your name. Start by identifying her emotional patterns. When does she feel most drained? When is she most chatty? When does she post the most on socials? What are her rituals? Coffee at 8:15, gym at 6, journaling before bed. Then align with them. Text her before her anxiety kicks in, not after. Ask her about the thing she always complains about on Thursdays. Send a photo from your day that connects to hers, like a flower you saw that reminds you of the perfume she wore on your second date. Each time you do this, you're creating micro-associations, and the human brain is built on associations. In behavioral psychology, there's a term called paired association. If two stimuli are presented close together in time often enough, the presence of one will trigger a response to the other even if it's absent. Think about the sound of a ringtone that reminds you of your ex, or the way you feel a chill when you pass a certain street corner. That's pairing in action. Now flip that. Imagine you becoming that ringtone, that chill, that voice inside her head when she's brushing her teeth and suddenly thinks, "I wonder what he's doing." That's your true power, invisibly persistent emotional presence. But the key is subtlety. If you become too obvious, you break the spell. If you're overbearing, she'll see it as neediness. But if you flow under her radar, if you blend your presence into things she already does, she won't resist. She'll absorb you like oxygen, like background music she didn't know was playing until it stopped. There's another real-life example. A man named Ravi started dating a girl who was extremely guarded, emotionally walled off, used to men trying to impress her with grandiosity. He did something else. He asked for her coffee order early on. The next week, he casually sent her a photo of the exact drink with the caption, "This looked like your vibe today." Then he didn't bring it up again. The following week, she sent him a coffee pic and said, "I guess this is our thing now." 2 months later, she admitted she thought about him every time she saw a chai latte. He didn't invade her life. He quietly moved in through a side door, and now she couldn't walk into a cafe without seeing him. These moments build silently. She won't text her group chat and say, "I'm falling," but she'll talk about you. She'll mention how thoughtful you are. She'll say things like, "It's weird, I didn't expect to care this much." What she's really saying is, "You've become part of how I process my day." That's the sweet spot, when you're not just someone she dates, you're someone her schedule recognizes. But it doesn't stop there. You can upgrade the embedding, add rituals, shared habits, songs only you two listen to. A phrase that means something only between you, emotional inside jokes, shared playlists, quotes, little routines. Like sending her a random question of the day, every morning, then teasing her for taking them seriously. Or always ending your calls with the same phrase, or leaving a voice note at the same time every Sunday night that she grows to need to sleep well. Suddenly, it's not about you anymore, it's about the pattern, and breaking that pattern feels uncomfortable. Foreign, wrong, because she's not just losing you, she's losing part of her daily identity. That's how you become irreplaceable. You weren't the most charming, you weren't the hottest, but you became the most familiar, the man whose emotional fingerprint was everywhere in her day. So if she wakes up and doesn't hear from you, she checks her phone twice. If she eats lunch and you haven't asked how her day's going, something feels off. If she can't fall asleep, she replays your voice notes, just to simulate your presence. That's not affection. That's dependence she won't even realize when it started. That's the beauty of it. It doesn't happen at once. It happens with emotional layering, and most men are too impatient to build it. But the man who masters routine embedding becomes essential. He doesn't just occupy space in her life, he organizes it, quietly, strategically. This is why it's so effective. Humans are built to seek predictability. We don't like new decisions, we fall back on what's already embedded. That's why most people eat the same 7 meals, rotate the same 5 songs, talk to the same 3 people. If you're one of them, if her brain files you under emotional routine, you've already won. Because when she's stressed, she won't reach for novelty. She'll reach for comfort, and comfort looks like the man who made himself part of her day without ever asking for space. A man once told me he embedded himself so deeply in a woman's life that even after she tried to move on, she'd still send him photos of her morning walks just because that's what they used to do. She said, "I don't even know why I'm sending these," but he knew. Her nervous system still thought he was part of the pattern. Her body didn't believe he was gone. That's the final test. If your absence feels louder than your presence ever was, you've done it right. And here's the thing. She might never say, "You're in my routine." She might never even realize it. But when you embed emotionally, she won't be able to detach cleanly, not without tearing the seams of her own day. Not without waking up and feeling the glitch in her rhythm. You want her to miss you before she knows she does. You want her to text you without knowing why. You want her to say, "My day feels weird. I don't know what's off." And all you'll have to do is say, "Maybe I am." Because by then, it won't matter if you're near or far. You're already in, not in her heart, in her habit. And habits are harder to break than love. Ever was she thinks silence means absence. But you know better. Silence is presence, weaponized. The most dangerous man isn't the one who speaks. It's the one who leaves behind an echo so loud it drowns out everyone else. The one whose absence vibrates in the parts of her she didn't even know were listening. Most men over-explain, over-pursue, over-text thinking their presence equals value. But the man who understands the psychology of strategic withdrawal becomes something else entirely. He becomes unforgettable, because when you give her something she craves, connection, intimacy, emotional closeness, and then vanish like fog from a mirror, you're not just walking away. You're amplifying every part of the experience in her mind. And the louder the silence, the more addictive the memory becomes. It's not ghosting, it's not manipulation, it's calibrated restraint. You're not disappearing out of fear. You're pulling back from a place of power, you're letting the emotional tension marinate, because space is where obsession grows. It's where her mind fills in the blanks, where imagination replaces reality, and imagination is always more potent than truth. Here's the psychology. Humans don't obsess over what they understand. We obsess over what we don't. When you leave after deep connection without tying it off with explanations, justifications, or pleasantries, her brain starts to loop. Did I say something wrong? Did I matter at all? Was it real? Will he come back? That loop is the doorway to emotional dependence. One woman, Lisa, once admitted she fell hardest for a man who made her feel like the only woman in the world for 3 nights straight. Deep talks, intense eye contact, gentle chaos, then silence, no fight, no breakup, just absence. At first, she told herself she was fine. But a week later, she couldn't focus. She replayed every word, every look. She scrolled through old messages like they were sacred scripture. What hurt most wasn't that he left. It's that he left a void, an emotional black hole that sucked in everything else. And that's the trick. You don't chase her after connection, you haunt her. Think of silence not as nothingness, but as contrast. In music, the silence between the notes is what gives the melody space to breathe. In seduction, the pause after the kiss, the hours after the touch, the days after the soul-sharing moment, that's what gives weight to the experience. It tells her this wasn't desperation, this wasn't dependence, this was depth, because the moment you leave, she can no longer use your words to ground herself. She has to turn inward, and when she turns inward, your voice, your tone, your energy, your scent, your words start to loop inside her. You've now moved from external stimulation to internal resonance. You're not just a man anymore. You're a phantom frequency she can't silence. A real story. Marco once told me he mastered this art by accident. He spent 3 intense days with a woman, shared stories, cooked for her, listened to the music she loved, even cried with her after she opened up about her past. Then his work took him out of the country. He didn't text for 5 days, not out of strategy, just distraction. When he returned, she met him at the airport, shaking, furious. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I felt like you ripped something out of me, and yet she couldn't walk away. Why? Because when you become someone's emotional mirror, when you see them, hear them, touch them in a way that makes them feel more alive, and then remove yourself, they don't miss you. They miss the version of themselves that only exists when you're near, and that longing becomes unbearable. This technique works especially well after intimacy, sexual, emotional, or spiritual. Why? Because the oxytocin released in the brain creates a bonding effect. It lowers defenses, it increases trust, but when that bond is formed and then left unsatisfied, left hanging without closure, the brain craves a completion cue. Without it, it keeps searching. Like a browser window that never fully loads, your absence becomes the open loop, and open loops are irresistible. The Zeigarnik effect, a psychological principle, explains that people remember unfinished experiences more vividly than completed ones. It's the reason you remember the ex who vanished more than the one who stayed. The mystery sticks. The lack of closure becomes a wound the mind won't stop touching. Strategic silence uses this to your advantage, but here's where it gets surgical. It's not enough to go silent. You have to go silent after value. You don't disappear after a casual date or a boring conversation. You disappear after she opens up, after you kiss her like a secret, after you hold her like a map to a place you've never been, after you touch something she didn't even know was still alive. Then, and only then, you pull away, because silence without depth is just distance. But silence after depth is emotional disruption. You don't owe her an explanation, you owe her an impression. One so deep it lingers in her bones, and when the silence stretches on past comfort, past understanding, that's when she starts to reach. That's when she stalks your old messages, rereads your compliments, plays that one voicemail over and over. That's when everything starts to mean something. That's when she becomes obsessed. Another woman, Tara, admitted to crying in her car because a man who used to send her morning affirmations stopped overnight. She said, "It's not even about the texts. It's that I built my mornings with him, and now I feel disoriented without them. He didn't ghost her. He just paused, he let her sit in the void, and the void did what attention never could. It carved space inside her for him." But this is where most men fail. They panic. They rush to fill the silence. They text, "Hey, sorry I was busy." They explain. They validate, and in doing so, they kill the ache. But the ache is what makes her addicted. The ache is what makes her wonder. It's what turns "I liked him" into "I need to see him again." Let the ache breathe, let your silence speak. Because in the end, words are forgettable, everyone talks, but the man who stops talking after making her feel like the universe narrowed down to just the two of you, he doesn't get forgotten. He becomes the question she keeps asking at midnight, the space between her breaths, the sentence that was never finished. And when you return, because you will do it without apology, without explanation, just resume, like nothing happened. Like the silence wasn't a cliff but a bridge. She'll act cold at first, guarded, but underneath she's starving. Because she's built up the fantasy of your return in her mind so vividly that reality won't matter. You can now re-enter her world as myth, as legend. You've weaponized absence. You've made silence your signature. And now, she listens harder when you say nothing at all. Every woman is telling herself a story, a quiet, constant narration that runs in the background of her life. It's the way she explains her heartbreaks, her victories, her beliefs about love. It's the inner dialogue she returns to when she's alone, looking at the ceiling, wondering why certain men make her feel everything all at once, and others don't move her at all. If you're smart, you won't just be part of that story, you'll write it. Being the author of her emotional narrative is the deepest level of influence you can hold over a woman. It's not just about being liked or wanted or remembered. It's about becoming the lens through which she sees herself, love, and the world around her. You become not just a man she's attracted to, but the plotline that explains her evolution. You're not just in her past. You define it. You don't just enter her present, you shape it, and the future. It will now be measured against the emotional framework you've created. How? You craft meaning, you rewrite the past. You assign significance to what would otherwise be random moments. Every shared glance, every night walk, every joke becomes a turning point. You install emotional metaphors that tie her identity to your presence. Because what we remember most in life isn't what happened. It's the story we tell ourselves about what happened. You show up differently. When you talk about the first time you met, you don't say, "We met at a party." You say, "The moment I saw you, something shifted. I didn't know what it was, but part of me knew I'd never forget that moment." Suddenly, it's not a random encounter. It's destiny. When you walk through a park together, you say, "This is the kind of place people return to when they want to remember when everything began." Now, that walk isn't just scenery. It's a chapter. You're planting memories that feel like prophecy. You're giving her narrative depth. And when someone gives meaning to your life, real, emotional meaning, you don't just remember them. You anchor your identity to them. That's what authorship is. Take this example. Jenna was an emotionally distant woman, successful, skeptical, guarded from years of being disappointed by emotionally tone-deaf men. Then she met someone who did something different. He listened, not to respond, but to construct. He started telling her stories about her life, reframed through a lens that gave her pain purpose. When she told him about her parents' divorce, he didn't just nod. He said, "That explains why you're always scanning the room, trying to keep the peace. You became the emotional anchor for your family without even realizing it. That's why people trust you. You learned to carry chaos without letting it spill." She stared at him in silence. No man had ever taken her pain and given it dignity, given it a plotline. He became the narrator of her experience, and after that, she couldn't let him go. Not because he saved her, but because he saw her, and in seeing her, he rewrote how she saw herself. That's the power you hold when you frame her story, when you redefine not just the relationship, but her identity inside it. Because here's the truth, we're all unreliable narrators of our own lives. Our memories are flawed. Our interpretations are shaky. But when someone offers a version of the story that feels better, more poetic, more connected, more powerful, we take it. We absorb it, we live it. You don't even need to be the hero in her story. You just need to be the storyteller. The man who remembers the exact words she said at 2:17 a.m. when she opened up about her brother. The one who says, "You always get quiet when you're overwhelmed, like you're retreating into a bunker no one else knows exists, but I'm already in it." That level of narrative intimacy rewires the connection. Now she's not just seen, she's understood, and that understanding makes you irreplaceable. It works in positive moments too. Don't just say, "We laughed a lot that night." Say, "That was the first time I realized you laugh with your entire body when you're safe. And I remember thinking, I'll do anything to make her feel that way again." With that sentence, you're turning a joke into a milestone. You're weaving it into the larger emotional plot. You're not a bystander in her life anymore. You're the co-writer of her origin story. Another man, Illy, used this concept on a woman named Claire. She was in her late 20s, emotionally raw after a breakup with someone who made her feel disposable. Illy never tried to replace that man. Instead, he reframed the entire emotional timeline. He told Claire, "I think that guy came into your life to show you what you never deserved, so that when someone finally listened the way you needed, you'd actually recognize it." She cried when he said that, because in one sentence, he turned years of emotional confusion into a lesson. A story, and he positioned himself as the man who helped her understand it all. That's the secret. When you give meaning to her past, she will trust you with her future. Because you're not just the guy she's dating. You're the voice in her head that explains why everything finally makes sense. There's a psychological term for this, narrative identity. It refers to how people form a sense of self by constructing an evolving story of their life. And guess what? People remember relationships, not for how long they lasted or how logical they were. They remember them for how they fit into the story of who they are. If you shape that story, you shape the woman. And here's the dark, seductive twist. If you remove yourself after anchoring yourself into that narrative, it creates an existential gap. She doesn't just miss you. She misses the version of herself that only existed when you were present. And that loss is louder than heartbreak. It's identity crisis. She'll feel like a character with no plot. A paragraph without punctuation, because you weren't just love. You were the meaning of it, but if you stay, you continue building the arc. You expand the chapters, you reference earlier scenes. With reverence, remember that night you told me about your fear of being left. It still blows my mind how much trust you gave me, even when everything in you said not to. You're keeping the emotional continuity alive. And with every callback, every reframe, every gentle weaving of shared memory, you bind her tighter to the one thing every human soul longs for, a coherent story. And in that story, your name becomes a theme, a symbol, a through line. You don't need to force emotions when you can write them in. Don't say, "I'm crazy about you." Say, "If this was a book, that night in the parking lot would be the moment the reader knows without any doubt that I'm not getting out of this without getting changed." Don't say, "You matter to me." Say, "You walked in at the exact moment I forgot who I was supposed to be, and somehow made that feel like a blessing." This is the new seduction. Not in how you touch her body, but in how you frame her becoming, the way you lift her pain into poetry, the way you turn ordinary glances into prologue and every shared silence into subtext, the way you plant emotional callbacks so deep that every time she remembers a moment, it leads back to you. You don't just write love, you become the author of her self-awareness, and once you're the storyteller in her emotional script, she'll read your name in every line, even the ones you never said out loud. If you found value in this and you're ready to go even deeper into the psychology of connection, hit that like button, and if you're not just watching, but studying, then subscribe now, because this is just the beginning of what she'll never see coming.